So as I begin, I want to say that we are building toward a new strategic plan. The strategic plan is a scaffolding for how we're going to live out as our presbytery. How are we going to be presbytery today and in the future, particularly the next, we say, 3, 4, 5 years. There's a 2030 strategic plan. And so it is our scaffolding. There are not any tactics. So if you're a person that is particularly like, I like the how-tos, we're not there yet. Okay, so these are broad-based strategies and broad-based objectives, but they did not come out of nowhere, right? So we were building toward this for a while now. So first, the first building block of our strategic plan was the landscape study and our listening sessions. Landscape, remember, a few years ago, we learned a lot from that, right? The landscape study provided a snapshot about where we are as a presbytery a couple of years ago as we were in transition, and identified also indicators that will drive our future decision-making, particularly regarding what might improve member satisfaction and energy. We remember that we were in that recovery quadrant, right? So we were low energy and low satisfaction. So we identified there were some significant rubs and friction points. So I knew that as being a pastor member of the presbytery and participating in the landscape study myself, but I knew that when I came on that it was really important for me to listen to people's experiences with the presbytery as ruling elders, as congregation members, as well as ministers. And so we had some listening sessions in the fall, and a lot of what we heard in the listening sessions really bore out what we had discovered in the landscape study. And so I wanted to highlight a few of those findings that I think are significant for us. We had listening sessions in probably all different corners of the presbytery, a mix of participants, a wide diversity of responses. And so what did we hear in those? First, this is our strength indicator, that the presbytery is seen as a vital support system for both churches and individual pastors with a strong focus on fostering relationships and creating spaces for growth, connection, and guidance. We are our best selves as a presbytery when we do this. We are a vital support system when we are able to have a strong focus of building community and connections and relationships among pastors, among congregations to congregations, when we have spaces where people can learn and to be equipped and empowered to do their work, and for guidance, especially when we're going through transitions and challenging chapters. What did we find a thing that we needed to grow on? What was our growing edge? Well, people responded in the listening sessions that they needed a stronger, more proactive, the more intentional outreach. We needed better communication and more structured support systems, particularly in those moments of transition and crisis, and also relational isolation. That's a key part. Remember, we are just 5 years from COVID. So recovering our capacity for connection and having a relationship is something that's really important people are seeking, congregation to congregation, pastor to pastor. And then it would be beneficial for many involved. So we heard our strength where we're vital. We also hear where we need to grow. Where do we need to put some energy toward? And so that kind of distills in this third finding, is that the presbytery is seen as a crucial partner in helping churches stay connected, relevant, and supported in their mission. There's a strong desire for increased visibility, more training opportunities, and more collaboration between congregations and care and support for pastors. This gave us a lot of really clues and understanding about what should the presbytery invest their time and in their energy and their priorities for. So a lot of responses came out. We don't know how to be engaged with our community. We don't know how to partner with an existing nonprofit or a congregation down the street. And we know it would be better together if we did those things, but we just don't know how to do it. Pastors have experienced deep isolation and loneliness and need support in order to be able to be more effective in their ministries and their leadership capacities. So this gave us a real good picture, confirmed a lot of our findings in the landscape study. And so it gave us another parts of our building block. So we listened well. That's step one in the first building block. The second building block was our purpose statement. So in 2023, during the time of transition, the executive committee, in terms of also preparing for the search for the new general minister, adopted the purpose statement that Pittsburgh Presbytery is a covenant community of Jesus Christ that exists to assist and support the witness of our congregations and members as we actually participate in the mission of the triune God in the world. Particular importance is the highlighted part. If we boil this down into a 30-second, 10-second really clip, a short clip, it was existing to assist and support the witness of our congregations and members. Now that's the purpose of our presbytery. So we adopted that in 2023, became one of those essential building blocks for building toward a new strategic plan. The other part of that is that to accomplish that purpose, the executive committee said we need to have a mission statement. And we developed the mission statement that we're using the acronym of GRACE. So to accomplish that purpose, to assist and support the witness of our congregations and our ministry leaders, this is what we said to do, how we're going to do it. GRACE. Gather church leaders and connect them for ministry and mutual benefit. Resource them through grants and collaborative sharing. Advise and assist them through challenges and transitions. Cultivate an environment that encourages them to innovate and experiment in new forms of ministry. Equip and encourage them as they proclaim the good news of Christ in the world and in word and in deed. So that was the GRACE mission statement. So that's how we're going to live out our purpose. So that was building block number 3. Building block number 4 is new. So that's all the things that happened in the transition: landscape, purpose, mission. Having a clear why. Why does the presbytery even exist at all? Like, we have the Book of Order that tells us, yeah, presbyteries have to exist, but why are we here? Why is Pittsburgh Presbytery here? What makes us unique? And so there are 3 fundamentals that kind of influence what I believe is our why. There's something about what we believe as a for our congregations, for our presbytery, and how that all comes together. So here is the first fundamental. The first fundamental is something about what we believe about our congregations, that our congregations and our ministry leaders are the ones that bear witness to the life-giving and life-changing good news of Jesus Christ in their particular neighborhoods by way of their unique expressions of faith and discipleship. Our congregations are the primary vehicle to do ministry and mission in their context because they are best suited and best placed to do that. It's something we have to believe about our congregations, that they are the ones who are able to bear witness to the good news of Jesus Christ in their neighborhoods by their unique expressions. But what does that mean for us? Well, we believe then we are better together because we can encourage each other's flourishings and seek ways to collaborate for the sake of God's kingdom. It is leaning into that covenantal part of our community, our covenantal community-ness, is that we are called to be together, not isolated as little churches all over, but we are better when we can come together, we can support each other, and we can work together for the sake of God's kingdom. So these 2 points then really influence what I think is the primary why of the presbytery. And the primary why of the presbytery is that we believe the presbytery serves as a catalyst by creating a framework where diverse faith expressions thrive and by facilitating connections for mutual ministry and mission. So the framework is the presbytery is able to help our diverse faith expressions thrive in their local context, and then we help facilitate those connections for mutual ministry, so for shared meaning, for collaboration, for connection. So that we believe is the fundamental why the presbytery exists, as catalyst, creating a framework, facilitate connections, as the driver of our why. So that is our building block number 4. So with those 4 components making that big base of our strategic plan, we listened, landscaped, we went through our purpose statement, our mission statements. We have a clear sense of why. All of these are drivers that make us ready for a new strategic plan to get us to live more effectively and faithfully to our why and our purpose. The first is strategy 1. And because I can't fit the entire strategy in that box, I'm simplifying to say structures and systems. And I'm going to go to what the first strategy is. And this one got wordsmithed a lot the other day with our EC. And this is to develop the framework of the presbytery to address the current and future needs of the presbytery. So what we know is that the systems and structures that we currently have in place really are like an albatross. We are using a lot of our energy and a lot of our resources to prop up systems and structures, as opposed to have those systems and structures support our work and our congregations. So we have an inversion of energy. So how do we have a framework that addresses what are current needs and also anticipate future ones? Well, we have some objectives that we think are going to get us there. And so strategy 1 has 4 objectives. And this, again, we wordsmithed and worked out with EC the other night. And the first one is to craft presbytery structures and systems to support the presbytery's vision and mission, and to be agile and flexible for new and changing realities. So as we think about what that might look like, and if you're thinking, does this mean restructuring? Yes, that's what it means. So we're needing to look a really careful look about how we are currently set up and whether our current setup is being effective. How does it need to be overhauled so that it can more reflect the realities that are current, as well as to be more open and nimble and flexible for future ministry? We know that ministry contexts are looking very different, and our systems and structures are not allowing for a way to be more nimble to respond to those. And so we have we're thinking about how do we restructure to meet where we are today. So the other part is streamlining and focus the work of the presbytery to increase satisfaction, engagement, and trust. We want people to feel like the presbytery is serving their needs, meeting their expectations, and so we can grow in a sense of trust and reliability as well. Streamline and focus the methods and process of communications for transparency, clarity, and consistency. We know we have work to do with our communication. How do we more effectively communicate? How do we celebrate the work of our congregations? How do we have a systems of communications where people feel connected and in the know, as well as to be resourced? The last objective here is assess and discern current and future needs to better utilize and leverage available resources with an eye towards sustainability and continuity. It's really taken a snapshot of what all of our resources that we have available. This is that asset mapping kind of time. What do we have in terms of financial, building, relational, community, congregations, so we can understand how to best leverage those resources so we can have a future ministry, but also ways that are sustainable for our congregations as well as for staff and the presbytery as a whole. This is going to be the 4 objectives that help get us to achieving that strategy. So at this time, I want to stop and take a moment and have a moment for you all just to see how that fits for you. How does that feel? How does this resonate with you as the first strategy or anything else we have talked about so far? And Ralph is the microphone guy and the recorder. Extraordinaire. Yeah. So is there any questions so far as we have a moment of pause? We will have a fuller round of questions in a minute, but I just wanted to stop here. Flores? Yeah.
It's another validated ministry. On the front side of the sheet, when you opened it up to anything we've talked about so far,
That's perfect.
That was the part. So I noticed under the why, in addition to congregations, it says ministry leaders. Under the purpose, in addition to congregations, it says members. But then under the mission, it focuses on church leaders. And then after that, it's the pronoun them, which I think is referring back to church leaders. So I'm interested there in whether church leaders is intended to be congregational specific, or whether it's meant to be a description that encompasses all kinds of ministry leadership within the presbytery, which is what I seem to see happening in the why and the purpose. Does that question make sense?
It absolutely does. And it's really helpful to notice how to be consistent in language. So I'm going to have Ralph make sure we put that down there. But yes, it's definitely, we wanted to broaden beyond pastors, because our mission has to think differently, not just ordained clergy or our commissioned pastors, to think more broadly with our ministry leaders, with our ruling elders who are needing a level of support and connection and resourcing that are different now, that are expanded. And so we wanted to make sure that was broad enough so that people can find a spot in that, no matter what kind of church leadership they are. Mm-hmm. Does that help?
Let me go ahead and then follow up,
Sure.
because you took it actually in a direction I hadn't expected.
Oh.
Where does a hospital chaplain, for instance, fall within this?
Right. So I think that's where I was intentional with ministry leaders, and not just in our churches, but recognizing that our leadership is broader with our chaplains and our hospitals and in our jail systems, as well as, say that again, education and so forth. So it was really to have this broadening view of many different types of ministry settings, because we also know that there's fresh expressions of community, faith community as well. So to kind of have that broader sense. But I think it's been really helpful to hear feedback for us about the consistency of language. And so I'm going to make note of that.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
It's you. Yes, it's you. Any other questions?
I have two questions under the why.
Yeah.
So I was hoping creating a framework might include, but where does oversight fit? Which is a major aspect of the presbytery in terms of making sure people are not.
Right.
People are flourishing is one part of oversight, which seems very strong in here, but one of the functions of the presbytery is to deal with things aren't flourishing or there's problem. How do we, boundaries training or PJCs or whatever. Anyway, oversight, where does that fit in this schema? And then also with, it seems like one of the functions of the presbytery that I don't know where it fits in is connection, helping people with connection to the larger church. You know, the presbytery meetings are about the book of order at least once a year. We're connected to this bigger body. How do we? So I'm just wondering where those two fit.
Sure. Thank you, Karen, for that. So you're right that we're going to note that and as it being a working document, but I think the connectional part is how I see that the local church is more broadly connected, but I do see the gap in where we are connected to the denomination in this statement with our larger church. And so aware of that might need to be strengthened. Yeah. But what I see is about the opportunities to create connection and collaboration among churches and also to grow their relational capacity beyond the presbytery meeting. One of the things, the discoveries in the EC retreat was really helpful is that we recognize we invite or we have utilized, that's probably the best word, we have utilized the presbytery meetings to be the primary driver of relationality. And that is not the best way in order to be in connection. is particularly as we mete out our relationality through policy, procedure, and governance. And recognizing that there has to be a broadening way of our connections. But I do see the gap that you have mentioned as well. So we make note of that. Okay. Jenny, you have a. Sure, that was Karen Clausen. Any other questions?
It'll come in. There we go. Scott Hill, Asimov Presbyterian Church. More of a comment underlining what you just said. I was looking at, to me, one of the big findings the last couple of years was the satisfaction, engagement, and trust issue, and how much we needed to work on that. And a little bit of disappointment that it seems to be only reflected here under restructuring, which is not the most promising way, but the way you just talked about restructuring. And that's, of course, the big issue is how do you create things that people want to be part of, and not just say they want to be part of or say should happen. So.
If it's all right, I'm going to go on with the other building blocks, and then we're going to open up for greater conversation. And there's 3 sessions, and I've already learned that I'm going to stop after the first 4 next time. So thank you all for that learning. I'm going to move on to our next one, and there will be a greater time for us to share in conversation. That strategy 2 is our building block 6. And so our strategy 2 for us, and what this means, it is simplifying, is empowering ministry leaders as a simple definition. And when we flip to the full strategy on your papers and here in the PowerPoint, is that empower our ministry leaders to more effectively lead and inspire their congregations and ministries. And how will we do that? Well, we've developed 3 objectives to go with this strategy. The first being develop methods to support ministry leaders to strengthen and sustain their capacity for practical and innovative leadership. I want to pause here just briefly. One of the things that we notice is that as we are dealing with decline, as we dealing with some challenges in terms of leadership, just broadly within our churches, one of the practical realities is around finances. And so we're thinking about ways that we can help support and resource our congregations so that they can learn some systems that they need to do, have access to resourcing, and even thinking about how do we pilot programs like gathering our church administrators or financial folks together so our folks here on staff can be supportive, as well as think of ways that maybe the presbytery can be a place in which brings some additional resources for bookkeeping for multiple churches for a pay-for-fee service. And so those are the practical sides, as well as navigating changing landscapes around insurance, ways of the structural pieces of just being the church that a lot of churches need support with. How do we help them to do that? As well as the innovative leadership. We know that the realities of leading a congregation are vast and changing and challenging all at the same time that require a level of innovation and imagination that church leaders want, but they need somebody to help them, resource and equip them. Because interesting, even though we deal with this trust deficit, folks commonly will say that they look to the presbytery to be the primary resourcer. They trust the presbytery when we do offer the resourcing available to them. The second objective is to expand opportunities and provide resources for ministry leaders to develop critical skills required to lead adaptive change in ministry. That goes with that second part of the innovative leadership, is that what are the resources and the opportunities that we can make available to our ministry leaders so they can be more successful in their context and help lead the adaptive change that is required. How do they look at their strength finders? How do we have asset mapping happening in our churches? How do we help them engage with their communities? And that is a lot of resourcing our ministry leaders to do that. And the third part is increase ministry leader connections for community support and collaboration. So it is really hard to do ministry by yourself. I've always been blessed to have a small staff And that was really important for me. But a lot of our church leaders are solo pastors or maybe the only person on staff, and they need a community. So some of these things in objective 1 and objective 2, the way that can happen is through some cohorting models of intentional support with learning how to engage your community. What kind of questions do you need to lead your congregations through and activities in order to do that? And developing some cohort for support and collaboration as well as for resourcing, but intentionally building up that relational capacity shared among our ministry leaders so they have reduced burnout as well as have additional methods, intentionality of methods of support. So that is our strategy 2 and our building block 6. So we go to our last building block for our time right now. And the second half then is empowering our congregations. This goes right up to that purpose where it says about assisting our members, our ministry leaders, and our churches. And so empowering our congregations is strategy number 3, to be a vital and transformative presence in their communities. I'm going to move to that one. How are we going to accomplish this? So we have 3 objectives for this strategy as well. The first is assist congregations in discerning and assessing their vitality and their future capacity for future ministry. So a lot of churches challenged by about where are they on the life cycle? How are they being vital? What are some indicators of our healthiness as a congregation? Not as a way to say we're coming in to close you, because obviously that's not going to be a good conversation. But to have an empowering way for church leaders to say, what are some indicators of health? What are some indicators of our vitality? How are we in our ministry for the next 3 to 5 years? So it can also be empowering for churches to have a sense of agency over their future. So on Friday night, I was with my colleague, the Rabbi Howie Stein, and his congregation, Temple B'nai Israel in White Oak, where I was serving, had their final Shabbat service on Friday. And they spent the last 2 years realizing that they were in a particular interesting position. They had enough money, they just didn't have enough members. And they recognized that they saw their future, and they had some moments of thinking about this, that they thought the gracious way to channel their legacy and their ministry was to have this time of intentional closing. And they really did a great job of thinking about how they were going to memorialize all of their things inside the synagogue, how they were going to sell it, how they were going to use the money, how were they going to resource their cemetery, all of those things. It was bittersweet on Friday, but you could see the level of agency and commitment and involvement of the congregation to say, we have served here well, we have given thanks for our ministry, and recognize now our stewardship of our resources is going to be a gift for the future of other. I think I'm good. Oh, I'm good. All right. So in our second objective here is to increase intentional and meaningful opportunities for congregations to connect and to collaborate. And so how do we have our churches who may be in the same neighborhood? In our EC retreat, one of the folks on there, it's like, well, I know that I have like 3 Presbyterian churches in a 2-mile radius, and we have never done anything together. Now, some of that could be like there's differences of size, of community and things like that. But they recognized was like, well, there's probably some things we could work on together. How do we build those connections through the work of the presbytery being the framework and facilitator for that? Or perhaps what we discover is that we know churches are involved in food ministry, but Walt Church might be involved in food ministry and Colleen's church, and they don't know it. And they're not having conversations about how they might support each other, how they could work together or learn best practices. I was meeting with some folks the other day about mission work, and they're like, we know a bunch of our congregations are involved in mission, and there has been a whole shift of the denomination, as we know, with our mission co-workers. How do we build little networks among our churches who have mission work in Haiti or in Cameroon or in variety of contexts, right? We do our work in isolation. We can be better when we collaborate and we learn from one another, and we also support each other in our ministries as well. We can be a little bit more effective. So the last objective here is to expand opportunities to resource and equip congregations in both practical areas of being church and for adaptive and innovative ministry. So not just our ministry leaders, but finding ways that we help our congregations be more equipped and more resourced so that they can be more effective in their witness in their particular communities, in the kind of contexts and challenges that our churches are facing. Facing a community that has shifted dramatically. I'm working with the church in Brentwood. Brentwood is now becoming one of the most diverse places in Allegheny County. Huge Nepali population, as well as folks from South America. And they're learning, how do we reach out to our neighbors who are brand new to us, who may not speak language that I do, and they don't know how to reach out in a community that has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. So how do we empower and equip our churches to do that? So those are the three strategies for our third strategy in the last block of our building blocks to our strategic plan. So what I want to do now is I'm going to stop here again for questions and comments. And there's going to be a moment too where we're going to have some table conversations as well. But first, what are some questions you might have on these three components of the strategic plan about the systems and structures, empowering our ministry leaders, and empowering our congregations?
There I am. Jim Gilchrist, retired. This all looks fine to me, very good at a very general sort of level. As you mentioned earlier, I assume that when you flesh this out, it will become more specific. And apropos your very last observation, a couple of us, Carol and I, for example, are on a Alliance for Honor and Repair that's been spending the last 15 months or so listening to predominantly historically Black congregations, for example, and want to make sure that that gets specifically listed among some of the objectives and initiatives and so forth. So my question is just, I assume that sort of thing is going to get built into the plan. This is sort of 30,000 foot stuff. So the absence of those particulars will be made up as the plan gets fleshed out in more detail. Is that fair?
That is exactly right. So these are intentionally broad-based, and it is a 30,000 foot view. When we start working on the tactics that'll go for each of the objectives, those are the rubber meets the road moments. And how are we going to structure with an eye toward justice, toward anti-racism, toward the work that we've been called to as well. And so those tactics will help us. That's where things will become more specific. You're right. Any other questions? Oh, just get a microphone so people on the Zoom can hear you. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Thank you very much. Kathy Hamilton Varga, retired. And I would just urge, in reaching out to congregations, helping them. And when you mentioned the life cycle of a church, that I think can in some ways be overly worshipped, because all it takes is like one little thing
Mm.
to like zip that back up. So I would just urge caution about worshiping the life cycle of congregations.
Thank you. Jenny has a question on Zoom.
This is from Lauren Wolcott, who is an elder at Hot Metal Bridge. She says, how did you come to these conclusions? And can you share some of the stories you've heard or data you've collected that led you here?
Can you say that
Does that
again?
make sense?
I didn't hear all of it.
I'm sorry. How did you come to these conclusions? And then can you share some of the stories you've heard or data you've collected that led you here?
So that's a great question, Lauren. Thanks for that. So the foundation building blocks, and I'm going to go back to that so we can see that. And so these foundation building blocks are really what help influence and drive the strategic plan. So we learned a lot of data. We collected a ton of data in the landscape study that really revealed to that snapshot of where we are and indicated the drivers, the satisfaction and energy so we could be more effective. That was important, but I knew it was really important for me to listen. And so we had a variety of listening sessions that we collected a lot of data for and a lot of stories about people's experiences, both joys, concerns, things they wanted in terms of the presbytery to invest in priorities and strategies. And so that filled in a lot of that data as well. We went through that considerably at the EC retreat, so they could have access to that. And then all the work of transition. We developed a clear purpose and the grace, and then we wrestled with the EC about why we are here so that we have a clear directive and energy about why we exist as a presbytery. So those are the foundation blocks that have really helped influence where we are in our strategy. And I'm going to be honest, too, is that I was a pastor for 7 years within the presbytery. And so I had my own experience that bore into that. Also was the chair of the Commission on Ministry. So I knew some of the points of friction and tension that our churches experience as well as our pastors, and knew ways in which we might be more effective in our organization and our systems so that our pastors can be more supportive and connected, as well as our churches to be better witnesses in their community and to be more engaged. So some of that has borne into that, but also the collective wisdom of the executive committee that has wrestled with us over the last 6 weeks for the strategic plan has helped as well. Does that answer Lauren's question? Yeah, great. That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, so the other question is from Linda Lane, who's a member at East Liberty Presbyterian Church. How will the strategies, processes, and tactics be evaluated, and what does success look like?
Yeah, that is a really great question. And so again, this is the 30,000 view. Once we start into tactics, we are going to be establishing timelines for those tactics. And so each of the objectives, there'll be a tactic that'll be tactics that will be associated with it, and they're going to be put on a timeline. So we're going to institute this new structure, and we're going to have it formulated, and then we're going to have it implemented, and this is how it's going to be lived. Anytime you're dealing with restructuring, and I'm sure some of you have done that in your church, it is at minimum a 2 to 3 year process because you can restructure, but you have to deal with the culture around the systems. And that takes about 3 years in order to do that. So by the time we have lived into a new structure, we'll be like, well, it's now time for a new strategic plan. So we will be marking that with timelines and goals. And we're going to get to the next steps at the end about how we're going to take this strategic plan and get ready to launch it so we can move on to the tactics. Your question. Any other questions? Scott,
I know that you've, Scott Hill asked, well, I know that you've had some conversations with other councils, other presbyteries about things that work there. Is there anything you gleaned from that you want to share at this point?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the leadership staff, we went on a road trip I shared in February's meeting to our partners in National Capital and as well as Newcastle, with the purpose of learning what are they doing that is they have had some good energy about being more effective. And both of them really had told us, John Molina Moore has a great quote, is that the mission field of the presbytery is pastors, ministry leaders, and congregations. And I wholly stole that. Like, yes, because it's right. It's like our responsibility is to have our pastors be more equipped and empowered and resourced, as well as our congregations, because that fundamental why we believe that our congregations are the best and their best versions are the most effective in being a witness for Jesus Christ in their neighborhoods. And we also believe that we're better when we can do it together. And that is that resourcing, empowering, equipping part of it. And so that road trip was really helpful for us to see how they're doing that. Interesting at National Capital particularly, but also Newcastle. They are using a lot of what we call like cohort modeling around particularly exploring entrepreneurial ministry and mission, so you can diversify our revenue streams for our churches. Because we know that the giver-based model of stewardship is in all kinds of nonprofits. It's the same Sherry everywhere, that is not a sustainable option anymore. And so helping churches discover where they're planted and how they might develop an entrepreneurial sense of ministry as well alongside that. So they're cohorting churches who are doing that, exploring it, engaging in their community, and working with them on a year, 2 or 3 year basis. And they've had a lot of success with that, and working in conjunction with Fresh Expressions, particularly as their big partner, and that's a big influence in DC area. And so that was really helpful for us to see how they did that and how they resourced them, as well as helping churches to utilize the CAT study that we already have our churches in transition use, but they use that CAT and land, like it's a landscape study for mid-councils, to use that as an informative piece in order to participate in some of these cohorts and grant-making places. So the church has a good snapshot about who they are, what are their drivers of satisfaction and energy, as well as so they can be better equipped to understand how they can go from here to there in that cohort modeling. We learned a lot from that. Yeah, Lindsay had a question, and then Walt.
I actually just had a comment that for some of us who've been in the presbytery for a long time, there's a lot of motivations that are similar to what the branch system when it came out felt like. But I guess maybe some reassurance to folks is that there's really good storytelling happening about things that are already in place, like with the Alliance, and we heard at executive committee things where churches are already partnering and things. So it feels like it's grassroots coming up rather than us pushing down. So I'm hopeful that that is what we see out of this as well.
Walt Peachman from Bethesda Elizabeth and Olivet West Elizabeth. I'm excited about the strategy and plan that you have for existing churches in supporting them and caring for them. But strategically, historically, we have lost churches in predominantly poor areas of Pittsburgh.
Right.
And what are we as a presbytery going to do to address those issues, especially places like Braddock, Clareton, and then those that are on the cusp of also losing their presence as well.
Right. And that's a really good feedback point. And how do we be mindful of our less resourced churches? And is that a point where we expand our collaboration piece and working, partnering with churches? But that'll be one of the tactics that will have to be addressed with that as well. And also to be mindful if it's a gap that we need to address it in the plan. Yeah.
I think it really needs to be addressed as a gap rather than just a little.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Walt. We'll make note of that. Jim and then Jenny.
Building on that comment, which I was going to make even before you said it, an historic activity of denominations like the PCUSA has also been ecumenical and interfaith. And while this is, in my first reading, it looks very heavily congregation focused, and that's fine. But we have historically been, I think, to important effect, ecumenically and interfaith minded, and in communities where we don't have strong congregations working with churches of other denominations, and at the judicatory level, you know this, I'm just saying for the group, cooperating with other Christian churches and interfaith things. You mentioned Howie Stein. We know Howie from the South Hills Jewish Christian Dialogue. Is it possible that that should be explicitly mentioned at this kind of 30,000 foot level, because that's something that is a little different from empowering congregations, although it can, of course, feed the efforts of local congregations. But there's something strong at the judicatory level when CCAC or Christian Associates, let's say, gets together and says something and does it interfaith with the Jewish community in Pittsburgh. That's powerful stuff that I don't quite see reflected here. So I wonder if that ought to be another sort of high level focus.
Jenny, do you have a question?
This was a clarification from Lauren. She said, my question was less about, so let me go back to the original question, I guess. Let's find that. How did you come to these conclusions, and can you share some of the stories you've heard or data you've collected that led you here? That was her original question.
Yeah.
And then her clarification was, my question was less about process and more about the themes you've heard in these listening sessions. I know you can't share every voice, but when you've heard the same pain point over and over, it's good for us to know those stories too and how this grew from them.
Yeah.
Do you need me to repeat it, or is that
No,
okay?
that's really helpful. So yeah, so in our data, we were able to really hear from particularly ministry leaders who did not feel supportive in parts of transition or crisis. And so you hear that especially in that growing edge parts of the listening session. And the reality of not being proactive is sort of, there's this response among our church leaders and our churches that the presbytery is not responsive to the actual needs in which ministers and ministry leaders and congregations are actually facing. And what that means is sort of like, why I brought up example of finances is like, we're really stretched here and we need the presbytery to be responsive in an intentional way. And so, we know what's a big issue is the reality of full-time ministry and how that is causing a pressure point among our congregations where there's no longer full-time calls. And it's particularly painful for us as staff and this commission of ministry. This is where I was like, I wish I was a bishop is what I say to them. I wish I was a bishop. I could just plop someone here. But we're in a variety of calls where it's a halftime call and another church on the street's looking for a halftime call and imagining what it looks like to do shared ministry. That is a jump and a leap for a lot of churches, and it takes a ton of intentional work in order to build that capacity. And so a lot of churches are looking for us to be more responsive to the realities they're facing, and that the presbytery steps in a place of resourcing to meet those needs is what I heard over and over again, whether as pastors or congregations. We need you to do this more. We need to be more connected here more. We need more support here. Sometimes it wasn't articulated in specifics. Sometimes it was.
So I just had a specific example of that. You know, where we failed was in COM. It took for one of our pulpit supply pastors to come to us and say out loud, you know, I am going to this specific church once a month to perform communion. So we were losing pastors in churches, not addressing the need for someone to come and do communion in those churches. So it took for those individuals to come to us and say, hey, this is a real issue out here that we're seeing in order for us to act. And in Jess's sessions, that was brought to full circle.
Yeah, and so we have to be mindful of who we are listening to. Like these listening sessions are great. One of the things we heard about that is that we need to be able, and we're going to do this, bring all of our pulpit supply people together. There's a lot of learning from our folks who are engaged, and some of you are in the room, They're engaged in weekly pulpit supply, mostly serving our congregations who are living pulpit supply week by week. So how do we learn from them to say, okay, what are the gaps that we need to be mindful of? What is a possibility for new ministry models that come out from that? But that is taking a real intentional ear to the ground approach and using that as bubbling up so that we can be more responsive. I mean, Elizabeth and Lisa are who are here. Lisa is our new financial administrator. Elizabeth, as you know, is our business administrator. They're hearing, they'll get a call. Our treasurer has a medical emergency and now we are at loss. And so they are going above and beyond their responsibilities to resource those churches. It is a compelling, huge need. And so we need to be able to listen and then to more quickly and more nimbly be able to respond so that our churches feel that we are supporting them.
You set me up very nicely. Forrest Kloss, another validated ministry. Thank you for what you're saying about listening to particular groups with particular needs within the presbytery. I want to put a flag on that one strongly and say, lean into doing that. When I look at the language in strategy 1, and particularly compare objective 2 and objective 3, one of the things that I see there is objective 2 talks about engagement as one of satisfaction, engagement, trust, right? Objective 3, the communications all seem to be outward directed, right? So transparency, clarity, consistency are goals that are being met by push communications. And what I'd love to have reflected, at least at a tactical level on either 2 or 3, is something where communications go both directions. Because I think that's core to how engagement and trust happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Forrest. Yeah.
Mark Roth, East Liberty Presbyterian. As long as I've been involved in Presbytery, there's been one fundamental tension, and I'm just wanting to know if this has come up yet, or how this issue might be handled. I think all the parts of the plan so far that relate to offering resources to congregations to be a vital voice for Christ in their communities, to collaborate with each other, that's all very important. But at a practical level, with so many small congregations, what I've always seen as a pattern is you have some congregations that are desperately wanting to figure out how to do that better. You have other congregations that just want to be chaplaincies.
Yeah.
They want to keep serving their existing members in a compassionate way, but they really are frankly not that interested in engaging with the community. And so my question in terms of a strategic plan is, have there been discussions about what the presbytery does about that? Do you have a whole separate stream of people or a set of people that attend to these kinds of congregations? Or do you kind of just leave them there to do that thing and invest your energy in the congregations that want to have a bigger impact? Have things reached that level of discussion?
I don't think it's reached that detail, but I think the tension is there and it's persistent. It's been persistent since, as you said, in a long time, the presbytery is, and that's one of the things is listening to the challenges on the ground. And we recognize, is there a new ministry model? And the first part of that congregation one was assessing the vitality. And that isn't to say there's winners and losers. Like that's not it. It's to say, well, where are we? And if there is a place of chaplaincy, well, maybe there's some new ministry model that we can help support our churches as they're thinking about, we're going to be on, and I have conversations, we're going to be on until the lights are able to be closed. Okay, but how do we resource those congregations too? And that might be a different kind of a model. Listening from our pulpit supply folks, I think we're going to learn a lot to say they need pastoral care support, which they're not getting. So how do we might think of a model of ministry this is my brainstorming session, but the tactical part is maybe we have somebody who is employed by the presbytery, right? And they're servicing as a chaplain among those churches that are offering pastoral care. And it's a fee-for-based service model. And so we're exploring that, hoping to pilot that with the financial piece, because that's more practical, right? You need bookkeeping services, we can provide it, and it's a fee-for-service kind of model. Could we imagine that in a different context? So, and to look at both the unique experiences and needs. Yeah.
I would just say also then that with strategy 2, that like we're really good as a presbytery at reacting when it's gotten to that level.
Yeah.
But as the pastor of a mid-sized congregation of 273 members, and I'm sorry for one of my members who I think is on Zoom, but like in the next 20 years, like I can tell you financially, we're going to be living off of our endowment. So pastors need that resourcing to be able to see that long-term future as well, so that when they're leaving those congregations within the next 20 years, they're not leaving them then like, oh my gosh, we had no idea the financial destitution that we're going to be in. So that I think that would put the presbytery in a better position to not be like reacting to everything that happens, but having long-term plans to support those. And that starts with pastors having the wisdom to not just sit on our laurels when we know we can get paid through the next year, but to think strategically beyond our service to that particular congregation.
And also recognizing the role of the pastor is the one who's suited to do that. Like there is a whole leadership capacity part of that to help resource our pastors and clergy to say, how do you future cast? How do you help your congregation explore what that's going to look like your 5 to 10 year out and for ministry, and to have those courageous conversations? Yeah, that's really helpful. Any others? Well, friends, what we'll have you do for about 5 minutes, because you're probably tired of hearing me talk, maybe, that I want you to have some table conversation just for a few minutes, and just say, how is this fitting for you? If I'm trying this on for a size, it is scaffolding, which I really like that word, because it gives us sort of the framework, the body, the skeleton to keep us up. But there's a lot of things that need fleshed out, definitely. And so I invite you to have some conversation around your table about that for 5 minutes. And then we're going to share at the end. Friends at Zoom, if you hold on for a little bit, we'll come back to talk about what's the game plan after this. So just spend a couple of minutes to do that. How does it feel for you? As a whole group, if you have any feedback that you would like to share, maybe from your table conversation, or you'll go home, you're like, I really wanted to ask that question or offer that comment, email them to me. Walt is also the chair, one of the chairs of EC. You can email Walt as well. And we're wrestling with it. A working document as we kind of hear and broaden our stakeholder input in this season. So what's next? Because that's a proverbial, the essential question, not proverbial, essential question, is that we're going to have a pre-presbytery lunch event. So on May 22nd, when you get the meeting notice, there'll be an opportunity to sign up for a lunch at Eastminster and before the presbytery meeting at 11 o'clock. And you're going to get into small groups. We're going to ask you when you register all kinds of like demographic information about maybe ministry you use or you do, or mission and things like that, church size, what kind of ministry leadership that you have. And we're going to intentionally build community around that with those intentional questions. And so you'll be in a group where a church or a pastor might have similar experiences as you do, in order to engage the strategic plan from that 30,000-foot view to a lower view, that tactical part. I want you to brainstorm. We'll be brainstorming tactics rather, brainstorming tactics in order to build out the plan. So we will have intentional questions around the table. How on that you might get strategy 1, objective 2. okay, what does this look like if we were brainstorming some tactics in order to have this happen? And so we're going to take that feedback as we continue to build out the plan. And so that'll be part of what we do in our small group engagement sessions at a pre-presbytery lunch. So that is the immediate next step on implementing our strategic plan. What's beyond that? Question, this is a question because we're not there yet, is ready to launch. Now, a goal would be to 2025 to say, we approve of the direction and the scaffolding of the strategic plan. So then we can get toward building out those tactics, particularly starting with that strategy one about systems and structures, because that's going to take some time to build out. And it can also be the points where there's going to be some tension and rubs that develop for that. So we'll have work with that as well. So our goal is fall of 2025, but if we're ready, but that's why it's a question mark, ready to launch. And EC will look at that, hear all the stakeholder input, continue to refine and strengthen the strategic plan, and then hopefully we can get ready to launch in 2025. Any questions or comments you want to offer, friends online as well? If you have any, we'd love to hear that before we depart. Oh, sorry, Patty. Can you get on? We have to get, so we have to hear you on
Sorry.
Zoom.
I just thank you very much. It's really reflective of a lot of thought and prayer, I believe, and the Spirit working. These are all really good objectives. I don't know, one thing that just popped into my head, I should mention this, I wonder about a roving evangelist from the Presbytery, going out to try to reach people on the street and direct them to Presbyterian church. Just a thought.
Hold that when you go to lunch on the 22nd. I don't mention that's a tactic. Anybody else? I see someone else's hand. Well, I'm thankful that you have given some time this morning, whether that's online or here in person, for a little over an hour conversation. Feel welcome to hang out for a little while, grab more snacks, or if you want to talk to me one-on-one or any of the staff folk as well. Some other folks are here from EC. Lindsay is on EC. Those of you on EC, if you can raise your hand. Ann, Walt, also feel welcome to engage with our EC members if you would like to stay after and have some more conversation. So may your day be a blessing. If you don't have power, may your power come on as soon as possible, and to find joy in the midst of all of those things. And I give thanks for your ministry and your participation today. Thank you all, and I'll see you on the 22nd, if not before then.